Have you ever spent years standing outside the door of your dreams? Not because it was locked, but because you were too afraid to knock. This is the story of a young man who learned that sometimes the biggest thing standing between us and success is not lack of talent, not lack of money, not lack of opportunity, but the fear of asking. In a small village surrounded by hills and dusty roads lived a young man. He owned very little. Every morning before sunrise, he carried water buckets through the village. He repaired broken fences. He hauled heavy sacks through crowded marketplaces. He accepted any work he could find. He worked harder than most people around him. Yet no matter how hard he worked, his life never seemed to change. Every day felt exactly like the one before. Overlooking the village stood a magnificent mansion. It sat high on a hill, larger than any building for miles. Its windows glowed warmly every evening. Its gardens stretched far beyond the eye could see. Its iron gates seemed to guard an entirely different world. The young man often stopped and stared at it, and every time he wondered the same thing. What must life be like inside? The villagers loved talking about the owner of the mansion, and some said he was one of the wealthiest men in the country. Others said he had built successful businesses from nothing. Many believed he possessed incredible wisdom. People traveled from distant cities just to seek his advice. The young man listened to these stories for years, and every time he heard them, he felt hope. Maybe this man could teach him something. Maybe he could help him change his future. Maybe he could show him a better path. But another thought always followed. Why would someone like him ever talk to someone like me? And so he never asked. Years passed. The young man grew older. He continued working tirelessly, yet his life remained exactly the same. The mansion stayed on the hill, and he stayed below it, watching, wondering, dreaming, but never taking a step forward. Then came a harsh winter. Snow covered the village. Jobs disappeared. People struggled to survive. The young man searched everywhere for work, day after day, door after door, but nobody needed help. His savings slowly vanished. His pockets became empty. His hope began fading. One freezing evening, he sat outside a bakery. Inside, families laughed together. Fresh bread filled the air with a comforting smell. Warm golden light spilled from the windows. But outside he sat alone in the cold, hungry, exhausted, defeated. An elderly woman noticed him. She slowly walked over and sat beside him. For a moment neither spoke. Then she smiled kindly. "My son, why do you look so troubled?" The young man sighed. "I work hard every day. I do everything I can. But my life never changes. No matter how hard I try, I remain stuck." The old woman listened carefully. Then she asked a simple question. "Have you ever gone to the mansion?" The young man laughed softly. "Of course not. Why would someone like that want to meet someone like me?" The old woman looked directly into his eyes. "And how do you know that?" The young man opened his mouth to answer, but no words came, because the truth was, he didn't know. He had simply assumed. The old woman smiled. "For years I've watched you carry water. I've watched you carry sacks. I've watched you carry everyone's burdens. But there's one burden you've never carried." The young man looked confused. "What burden?" "The burden of asking." Those words struck him deeply, because for the first time he realized something. He had spent years fearing rejection from a conversation that had never happened, years imagining failure, years convincing himself the answer would be no, without ever asking the question. That night he couldn't sleep. He sat beside a candle in his small room. The old woman's words echoed through his mind. "How do you know unless you ask?" As moonlight streamed through the window, he finally understood. The mansion wasn't holding him back. Fear was. The next morning, before doubt could return, he made a decision. He would go. He would ask. His heart pounded as he walked toward the mansion. Every step felt heavier than the last. What if they laughed at him? What if they turned him away? What if he embarrassed himself? The fear grew stronger with every step. But he kept walking. Soon he stood before the iron gates, then the long stone pathway, then the grand front door. His hand trembled. Every excuse he'd ever made came rushing back. Turn around, go home. You're wasting your time like you don't belong here. But something inside him refused to listen. Slowly he raised his hand and knocked.
Moments later, the door opened. A servant greeted him politely. The young man nearly lost his courage, but somehow he spoke. "May I meet the owner?" To his surprise, the servant smiled. "Please come in." The young man stepped inside. The mansion was more beautiful than he had imagined. Towering bookshelves, grand staircases, magnificent halls. But none of it surprised him as much as the owner himself. The old man welcomed him warmly. No arrogance, no judgment, no mockery, only kindness. The young man shared his struggles, his frustrations, his dreams, his fears. And the old man listened carefully. When he finished speaking, the old man smiled. "You know something. Most people come here asking for money. Very few come asking for wisdom." That day changed the young man's life forever, not because he received wealth, not because he received special treatment, but because he received knowledge. Over the following months, he returned again and again. The old man taught him business, discipline, leadership, communication, decision-making, responsibility. The young man studied every lesson, read countless books, filled notebooks with notes, asked questions without fear, and for the first time in his life, he felt himself growing. Years passed. He started a small business, then another, then another. Each success built upon the lessons he had learned. Slowly but surely, his life transformed. Eventually, he became one of the most respected businessmen in the region. Not because he was lucky, not because someone handed him success, but because he found the courage to ask. Yet his greatest achievement wasn't his wealth, it was his generosity. He helped struggling families, created jobs, supported schools, opened doors for others, just as someone had once opened a door for him. One evening, many years later, he stood overlooking the village at sunset. The same village, the same hill, the same mansion, but a completely different life. A young boy approached him. "Sir," the boy asked, "what was the secret to your success?" The man smiled, then pointed toward the mansion. "For years," he said, "I thought that mansion was impossible to enter. I believed people like me didn't belong there. I spent years standing outside a door that was never locked." The boy looked confused. "What changed?" The man smiled. "I finally knocked. And that's the lesson. Many opportunities are waiting for us. Many doors are already open. But fear convinces us to stay outside. Fear tells us no before life ever gets a chance to answer. So if there's something you've always wanted, a dream, an opportunity, a conversation, a chance, don't spend years wondering what might happen. Ask, try, knock. Because sometimes the difference between an ordinary life and an extraordinary one is simply having the courage to ask and having the courage to knock on the door you were always meant to open.